is larger than life. It is called Texas high school football. Only one show can bring the greatest sport from the greatest state into focus. Lone Star Gridiron.
The dynamic world of business, staying ahead of the curve is crucial. A podcast can be your golden ticket. Why, you ask? First off, it amplifies your authority. You're not just selling products or services, you're sharing knowledge and experiences. You're a thought leader, a beacon in your industry. And then there's the reach. Podcasts cross borders, time zones, and cultures. It's a global marketplace at your fingertips. Next, consider the personal connection. Your voice, your sincerity, resonating in the ears of your audience. It's intimate, it's powerful. Lastly, it's a savvy marketing move. Low cost, high impact. It's your brand's voice, literally and figuratively. So business owners, consider this. A podcast could be your next big step. It's not just about the now, it's about the future. Don't just survive, thrive. Reach out to Chris at Fresh Media Works to find out how to use podcasting to boost your business.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the 2A Lone Star Gridiron 2A breakdown. I'm Chris Daly. I'm joined always Coach Travis McClain. How you doing, Coach?
And we're living out here. We're living. It's starting to cool off. Practice is a little almost sweatshirt weather for me.
Almost. Yeah, it's got to drop at least another 10, 15 degrees.
I'm a long sleeve guy, so once we get into the high 80s, it's hoodies all day.
Nice. Well, let's jump in with Class 2A D2. Just glancing at the rankings, the biggest mover was Sunray, 65-0 over Stinnett, West Texas. They moved up 7 spots, so they took quite a jump. Biggest dropper, Collinsville dropped 2 spots. Bremond dropped 2 spots. Any feedback you have on where our rankings are?
Yeah, and I think the movement of Sunray, just going back and looking at their schedule, they lose a close one to Stratford week 2.
Yeah.
And I think that might have been a little bit of them dropping so far might have been almost a little bit of an overreaction of okay, they're not who we thought they were. Mm-hmm. But then they come back to the next 2 weeks and they win 80-0, 65-0. And we, everybody kind of looks back and goes, okay, maybe they're exactly who we thought they were, minus a 3-point loss. And then Collinsville, you lose a game, you expect to drop a little bit, but they were down big in that game against Cooper and then fight tooth and nail to make it a close game in the second half. So you expect to drop if you lose a game, right? But I think
Cooper's top 10.
Is a solid 2A Division I team. So I think that anything from them being stagnant to I think at most a 2-spot drop was definitely within the realm of expectation, just because there's still a lot of undefeated football teams out there. And so when you're looking at a 3-1 versus a 4-0, yes, you want to look at strength of schedule and who that opponent is. But, that 0 does, it's hard to go undefeated. So the deeper we get into this, the more valuable that 0 in the loss column looks.
Yeah, definitely. Nothing changed in the top 3, Mart, Albany, and New Home. We have 3 that came in for the first time. We have Deweyville and Milano came in tied at 13th, and Seymour came in at 15th. So our bottom 3 spots were not ranked last week.
And I think that, you and I kind of touched on that in the previous weeks. I think that that's where you're going to see the movement, right? Yeah. As teams start to kind of really identify who they are, I think that, what little movement you are going to see, it's going to be in that 11 to 15 range. And we might see some flashes of a new team a week that kind of slides in and out that window of the rankings.
Yeah, definitely. What do you see in D2 as far as games this week that stand out to you?
This week, there's, there's not a lot that I would say like this is the game that
Right.
there's an upset boiling, or we're gonna have. I think a lot of these games, because you're starting to see districts get into district play,
Mhm.
which limits your ability to really have a key like a marquee matchup
Yeah.
in one of those gauntlet districts. Most of these teams, the expectation for each week is pretty steadfast, and I don't see a ton this week that I would say we should really expect much out of.
Yeah, I
Especially if
think
you look at like Sunray, who made the big jump. I mean, they're
right.
they're, they're going up against Crosbyton, and they need to take care of business in their last non-district game and really kind of solidify the big jump that they just made.
Yeah, we've got two ranked teams that are both in 2AD2 ranked. Deweyville again is a new team to the ranking. They're going up against Chilton. I still think that's Chilton's game, to give away. I think it's their win. It's going to be up to them if they lose, though.
And I will say that I think that a team like Deweyville can say a lot about themselves with
Yeah,
how this game plays out. This has got to be a game that's process driven, because if they come out and they allow Chilton to jump out to an early lead and stretch this thing into, a 20, 30, potentially 40-point victory,
yeah,
then everybody's going to rethink, all right, did we give them too much credit, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas if you keep this close going into halftime, if, it's close going into the fourth quarter, I've seen situations like this at all levels, whether it be 2A or Power 5, where a team loses,
yep.
the 13th team, ranked team loses to the number 4 team, and they still jump a spot.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. This is a perfect setup for Deweyville. If they can keep it close and show that they can hang with Chilton, whether they win or lose, you're right. They could move up a spot or two.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then Albany, they're playing Comanche, so that should be a decent game. But like you said, not a lot of marquee matchups.
Yeah, and I think that, Albany's got to be careful because, they're coming off their win against Hawley, which I think that kind of surprised a lot of us, which is odd to say because you're talking about the number 2 team in 2A Division II going against what was Hawley last week? 6 or 5?
Yeah. They dropped 5 spots, so they were 10 last week.
So, I mean, you're talking about a top 10 Division I team versus a top 10
Right.
division or a top 2 Division II team. And when you lose a game like that, it's surprising to me just because, when you hear Hawley, there's a certain expectation you have. But Albany's got to be careful that they don't go to sleep, because Comanche's proven that they can score in bunches.
Yeah.
They've shown that they can put a lot of points on the board, and so if this thing ends up being a shootout, and Comanche being a bigger school, they could find themselves in trouble late in the second half. So I think that's probably the most interesting game on the Division II list.
Yeah.
But if Albany goes and takes care of business like a lot of people think they should, then they should be just fine. But they got to be. You don't want to call it a trap game because you're playing a school two divisions bigger than you.
Mm-hmm.
But you are coming off of probably what I would assume to be a pretty big win against Hawley.
Yeah, definitely, and that's probably a good transition over to 2AD1 because Hawley is a team I want to talk about. They dropped 5 spots. They dropped down to 15, and I think Hawley. Yes, they were state champions last year, but I think that they were ranked way too high early on in the year, just off of that reputation, and they really haven't shown themselves to be the team they were last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you lose a game to Jim Ned, and then like we just talked about Albany, but even in their 2 victories, you're talking about 47 points in 2 games, in the 2 games that they won. And for me, the mark of a good team with the ability for longevity has got to be on one side of the ball or the other. You know what I mean? If you're gonna hold a team to low scores, then you got to hold a team to low scores. And if you're going to be a high scoring team, then you got to be a high scoring team. But when you look at what they've done from a production standpoint, it's just a little inconsistent. So I would definitely agree with you that we as the rankers are still trying to really get a peg on who Holly's really going to be. Now, the one thing that you can say is, did they drop? Absolutely. But there's a reason that they held on to that 15th spot.
Right.
And I think that there is a little bit of weight that can be merited to program, tradition, coaching, things of that nature. This is a team that right now is sitting at 2-2 and sitting at 15th in the rankings, but it doesn't take much for a program like this to get hot and really start to make some moves that we may not see a bunch of jumps in the polls or in the rankings, but sets them up for, a December playoff run.
Yeah, because everything changes in the playoffs. That's where that experience comes in. You're right. They may roll through district and it won't do a whole lot to the rankings because their district isn't full of top 10 teams. But you're right. Once they hit the playoffs, that experience will shoot them, ahead of some other people.
And I think as we talk about this, Peter saying, how about them Sonora Broncos? I think that, Sonora is in a situation where they're sitting in the rankings right here at 8. Sonora's in a situation where they've just got to keep doing what they've been doing. They can't afford, based off of strength of schedule and who they're going to come across in district, they can't really afford to have a lull where they're winning a game by 3 points, or, if they're going to stay in that top 10, if they're going to climb 1 or 2 or 3 spots, they've got to continue to win in dominant fashion.
Yeah, like they did against Alpine.
Absolutely.
They go up against Harper, 3-1 Harper this time, which again is a good team. It's not a, top 10 ranked team, but like you said, they've got to show that they're clearly better than a team like this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the other team that I wanted to point out that I'm glad to see moving up is Three Rivers. Early on preseason, I had them picked pretty high and challenging for second or third in their district. And they started a little slow, but they're putting it all together. And huge win over Banchetti. That's not a surprise, but like I said, I think they're doing well.
Absolutely. And again, there's a thing that, you take out the week 2 game against Nixon where they've only put up 14 points, but every other week they've proven the ability to score.
Yeah.
And I think that, like I said, if you're going to be a good program, if you're going to solidify yourself in the top 15, whatever your strength is has got to be strong. And if you're holding teams to less than 10 points a game every single week, okay, so the strength of your defense or the strength of your team is your defense. It's got to consistently be that, right? But if you're a team that proves that they can go out and score points, well, you better make sure that you're scoring points every week. If you're really going to solidify that spot and start to climb up the ladder. One team that, I wanted to make sure we mentioned, Cooper, we talked about them playing Collinsville. They win that close game against Collinsville, but they end up dropping 2 spots to number 9.
Yeah.
And, the thing to me that I want to make sure that I say and kind of get your feedback on, see if you agree, is I think that them dropping has a lot to do with us learning more about everybody else and not so much about what Cooper's doing. They lost the game against Hooks. Hooks is a good 3A school, but they're 3-1 and they beat, a good Collinsville program.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily that, they're not winning the right way or any of that.
Right.
I think that we're learning a lot more about everybody else than we might feel like we're able to learn about them right now.
No, I agree with that completely. And the fact that they were tied for 7th place last week means they're also tied for 8th place. So they really only dropped 1 spot.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like they dropped 2 spots because they went from tied for 7th down to 9th. But yeah, you're right. They're a team that I think we have confidence in. But like you said, we saw some stuff from some other teams that maybe we weren't giving credit to. So you're right. I agree with that totally. I see Beckville's the other one that is the big mover. When I say big, 2 spots they moved up. Beckville did after a pretty good win against Elysian Fields.
Absolutely. And, they're, excuse me, I think that they're a team that, that week 1 game, it's not that they lost to Timpson. It's how they lost to Timpson with a score that big, and Terry Bussey didn't play. I think that it knocked them a little bit farther than some people might have originally thought going in. Because you could have easily seen them lose that game and be sitting at number 3 the very next week, right?
Yeah.
If it's a 1-point game, if it's a 2-point game, if it's a last possession game. But they're having, their climb is kind of, I think, based off of how far that fall was after week 1.
Right. Yeah. And they're climbing back. They're getting back here.
Which is completely expected. We know that they have the talent. That's why they're sitting in the top 5 to begin with. That's why they started where they started. And that's why when they lost by double digits, they didn't fall completely out, right? We know the talent that they have and what that program's capable. It's, again, one of those situations where that consistency, improving it is what's going to really get them back up there pushing for, that 2 or 3 spot.
Definitely. And then you have a team like Refugio didn't budge because their game against Bishop was a forfeit. So they didn't even get to play. And you saw a lot of that along the Gulf Coast with all the lightning. There were a ton of games that were canceled, forfeited, and even if you look up in Cuero's game, they ended up playing to halftime. Cuero says, "We're going to count it." Their opponent, Cal Allen, said, "No, we're not going to count it. It didn't happen."
Exactly.
But it didn't matter, right?
Right. The other school that I do want to make sure and mention is, and they're actually on a bye week this week. Honey Grove held strong at number 7, and in about 30 days we're going to see a matchup between them and Cooper, and it's going to tell us a lot about both of them.
Yeah.
You look at Honey Grove and you look what they've been able to do the first few weeks and the points that they've been able to score. They've played 3 football games, kind of 3.5, because they had some lighting issue in week 3 against Cedar Hill TLC or week 2, and it got canceled. But you played 3 football games, you haven't given up a point. It's pretty impressive.
Very.
Now, I will say that going back, looking at some of the statistics, they are putting up a lot of points, but I don't know if they've had a lot. Their defense is playing really well. They've scored a handful of touchdowns on defense. They're forcing a lot of turnovers. They're getting great field position. And we know that the Morris brothers, especially little brother Rylan, he's a Division I athlete, and his capabilities are well documented. You don't pick up that many offers at 15 years old without having some pretty good tape. But I think that game on October 20th is going to tell us a ton about 2 really good football teams in Region 3.
Yeah, definitely. And looking at this week, the matchups, I tell you, I have never seen a top 15 with such an easy schedule as this week. It looks like we won't get much change in the rankings next week, because it looks like everybody except Centerville is set up for a pretty easy game.
Absolutely. And this is one of those situations where, like, talking about, Albany and their situation, you've got to be careful, because again, some of these schools, especially in that 6 to 14 range, they can win a football game and drop a spot.
Yeah.
Because of the quality of opponent and not winning, which sounds terrible. And obviously you never want to tell a locker room or a program this, but there is an expectation to win a certain way when you're a top 10, top 15 program.
No, I agree. Yeah, you look at the Holland game; they go up against Weimar. Weimar's not highly, thought of right now statewide, but they're 4-0. They're doing better than a lot of people thought they were going to do. So that it could be a trap for them.
Absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, and Wolf City's another one. That is going to be playing Cooper. They're 4-0, and we talked about Cooper being set up for that Honey Grove matchup later. If they're looking ahead to that matchup, they may overlook Wolf City.
100%. And Wolf City, like you mentioned, they're 4-0. They're undefeated. They were a 3rd place team last year, first year head coach with Coach Smithy, and they're playing a completely different style of football than they played last year. It's up tempo, it's fast paced. They're spreading the field. They've got a couple athletes that they're doing a good job of getting into space, and if they can be consistent on the field against Cooper, it's going to be a better game than people expect, especially if, like you said, Cooper gets caught looking down the road a couple exits later for that Honey Grove matchup.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, that's about all we have. Anything else to add?
No, the Fighting Rebels we're headed to Winsboro to play Como Picton this week.
Nice.
Como Picton was hit pretty hard with a bad tornado right there at the end of summer, and so they've had to do some. Coach Phillips has done some juggling around and reorganizing, and they're getting to play all their home games right down the road at Winsboro, and so we're gonna load the bus up and head over there Friday night and see if we can start district off the right way.
I love it. And to everybody who's listening and watching, give us some feedback. If you think there's something that we should be adjusting in the rankings, let us know. Don't just say, hey, you got it wrong. Tell us why. Tell us
Exactly.
what you know about this team that maybe we are missing.
Absolutely. If there's something that doesn't show up in the media, in the newspaper headlines or in the stat book that you think we need to know, man, tell us all about it.
Right on. All right. Well, Travis, I want to thank you again, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
You too.
Gridiron Warriors take the field in an epic battle that is larger than life. It is called Texas High School Football. Only one show can bring the greatest sport from the greatest state into focus. Lone Star Gridiron.